back to the Amplified Podcast. We're glad to have you with us. We are going through the book of Numbers together. We've been going through it for a number of weeks now, and we have 4 weeks left in the book of Numbers. We are on chapter 29. We're going to go through 29 and 30. These are leading up to the judgment that we're going to see over the Midianites in chapter 31, and then also the beginning of the settlement of the people into Israel. So like we've talked about in the past, the Bible is not necessarily the story of all of the whole world. I mean, in a way it is, in the sense that it's like we get to see how the world began, but this is not the story of the Chinese and the story of the Japanese, and why am I forgetting every country I know, and the South Africans and the French. This is the story of Israel. This is the story of God's people, who later on can become anybody. So anyone can be God's people, but this is mainly the story of God's people. So we're seeing how he interacts with the people that he's chosen, not because they were the best, not because they were really all that much better than anybody else, but because God chose them. He just did. And so, and it boiled down to one man that chose him as well, and that was Abraham. But all that to say, we're getting to see how they interact with one another, and really how terrible the Israelites are at being faithful to God, and how faithful he is to them despite. And so today we're going to see a couple more ways that they are going to remember their faithfulness to the Lord. We talked about last podcast how so quickly generations can forget what the older generations did. We see quickly where, you may have parents that don't speak English. They speak another language. You speak English and your language of your parents, but then your kids only speak English because you live in a new country. And that quickly, within a generation or two, that which has been passed down for generations and decades and centuries is forgotten. And God doesn't want that to happen with his people. So he's setting up all of these holidays. He's helping them remember in the best way possible. So we're going to look at 3 holidays today. We're going to look at the Feast of Booths, the Offering of the Atonement, and then the trumpets. And so we'll actually look at those in reverse order. But you can join us in Numbers chapter 29 and 30 today. And we're going to do a little bit of Bible math today as well. So, these are going to be really cool chapters. But definitely stick around for the next episode when we see the Midianites, because that is a wild story. Time and again, we're seeing all of these stories come out of the book of Numbers that we don't really hear about in church all that much. Not because they're not important, but because most preachers are going to focus on the New Testament quite a bit. And then also Numbers it could kind of feel monotonous after a while, but we don't understand what the people in the New Testament were doing unless we understand this section. And so let's dive into it. You can read from the Amplified text like I always do. You can follow along in the King James Version, the New Living Translation. The Alabaster Bibles don't have the book of Numbers yet, but they come, I think, in NIV and New Living Translation. And so highly recommend picking these up. These are awesome. You can order them online, and then the link is in the bio below. They're not a sponsor, but hopefully someday they will. So chapter 29, we're going to look at the Feast of Trumpets first. Here's what it says. On the first day of the 7th month, you shall have a holy summoned assembly. Everybody's getting together. You shall do no laborious work. It will be for you a day of blowing trumpets, the shofar, the ram's horn. So sometimes in Pentecostal churches, you'll see a trumpet. This is just them following in the tradition that we see all the way back in the book of Numbers. You shall offer a burnt offering as a sweet and soothing aroma to the Lord. 1 bull, 1 ram, 7 male lambs, 1 year old without blemish. If I'm not mistaken, that's actually what they were supposed to offer at the beginning of each week. But you'd have to go back and watch the last episode to verify. Also, their grain offering, the fine flour mixed with the oil, 3/10 of an ephah for the bull and 2/10 for the ram. 1/10 of an ephah for the 7 lambs, 1 male goat as a sin offering to make atonement for you. These are in addition to the burnt offerings of the new moon, its grain offering, the continual burnt offering, its grain offering, and their drink offerings according to the ordinance of them, a sweet and soothing aroma, an offering by fire to the Lord. So just like today, if a holiday, let's say a holiday falls on a Friday, July 4th falls on a Friday, you're going to get July 4th off. You're probably going to get July 3rd off, but you're still going to get Saturday and Sunday off just like every other week. Now we're talking about, just normal, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday jobs. Just because there's a holiday doesn't mean that you suddenly have to come in on Sunday unless there's something specific. It's the same thing that we're seeing here that, they're going to celebrate the Feast of Trumpets. Let's write this out. The Feast of Trumpets. So they're going to do all the celebrations for that feast, but they're also going to continually keep doing all of their morning and evening sacrifices. They're going to continue doing all of their Sabbath sacrifices, all of their first of the month sacrifices. So just because July 4th falls on Friday doesn't mean that we don't celebrate the Lord on Sunday. We still get those days off. And so that's the same thing that we're seeing here in Scripture. Okay, the next holiday is the Atonement. Then on the 10th day of the 7th month, you shall have a holy summoned assembly for the Day of Atonement. And I'll read about that in just a moment. You shall humble yourselves. You shall not do any work. You shall present this burnt offering to the Lord, a sweet and soothing aroma, 1 bull, 1 ram, 7 male lambs, 1 year old without blemish, and their grain offering of fine flour with oil, 3/10 of an ephah for the bull, 2/10 for the ram, 1/10 for the ephah of the 7 lambs, and 1 male goat as a sin offering, in addition to the sin offering of atonement, the continual burnt offering, and its grain offering, and their drink offering. So just because you're celebrating something specific today doesn't mean that we're going to negate all of our normal responsibilities. We have Thanksgiving as on a Thursday every year. That doesn't mean that tomorrow I get up after Thanksgiving and I'm not going to feed my kids tomorrow. I don't have kids and today's not Thanksgiving, but you get the idea that we're not going to negate all the normal things we would do for the Lord just because something special is happening. We're going to do them both, and the Lord's going to reward us all the more. Here's what it says for these verses in the Amplified text. This chapter regulates offerings to the Lord during 3 sacred festivals of the 7th month: the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles. That's another thing to note. So we have the Day of Atonement as well. All of these are happening in the 7th month. We talked about this several podcasts ago where we kind of listed out all of their holidays. This is all happening in the 7th month. And if we imagine that the first month is somewhere around April. So this is April, May, June, July, August, September, October. So this is going to be at the end of harvest when they have all this food and they're kind of celebrating the Lord for another faithful year. And so this is in the 7th month, but let's go on. The Feast of Trumpets marked the beginning of Israel's civil year. It was the day of preparation for the next 2 celebrations. The Day of Atonement was a solemn day on which sins were confessed and special sacrifices made for the holy place, the priests and the people. The Feast of Tabernacles was a time of rejoicing. So while all these other tribes out here, all these other peoples, they're getting out all of their drums and they're getting out their face paint and they're building big bonfires and they're celebrating their false gods and they're thanking them for, another year of harvest or whatever. God is wanting them to remember how faithful He has been over the years. This isn't a celebration of necessarily, the solstice or nature. This is a celebration of God's goodness and His history of goodness with the people as well. So that's why we see the Feast of Trumpets, the Feast of Atonement, and now we're going to look at the Feast of Tabernacles. On the 15th day of the 7th month, you shall have a holy summoned assembly. You shall do no laborious work. You shall observe a feast of booths to the Lord for 7 days. And what's cool about this is, no, it doesn't explain this. What's cool about this is they would actually build temporary living arrangements on their properties. And that instead of sleeping in their houses that night, they would go out and they would sleep underneath these temporary kind of shelters that they would make. Again, it's not a super rainy area of the world, so it's not like they're having to, get waterproof tents and everything, all this. It's just to help them remember that you were in the wilderness with the Lord. He was faithful then. He has brought you into this wonderful land of milk and honey. This is to not forget his faithfulness and what he did for you in the past. You shall present a burnt offering and offering by fire, sweet and soothing aroma to the Lord. 13 bulls, 2 rams, 14 male lambs, 1 year old without blemish. And their grain offerings, fine flour mixed with oil, 3/10 of an ephah for each of the 13 bulls, 2/10 of an ephah for each of the 2 rams, and 1/10 of an ephah for each of the 14 lambs. Also, 1 male goat as a sin offering in addition to the continual burnt offerings, its grain offering, and its drink offering. So with every holiday that they're celebrating, there are specific things that they're supposed to sacrifice, specific things that they are atoning for, things that they're celebrating with, aromas that they're offering up to the Lord, all in appreciation of who God is and our way of moving closer to him. Now, the problem becomes later on that these people aren't doing it anymore because they're being faithful to God, but because it's just routine. So we have the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and then the Feast of Booths. This is kind of like we have holiday, the holiday season at the end of the year. This is their holiday season. But the problem becomes just like it is today, that we have so many people that go to church, not because they actually care about the Lord, but it's just because that's what we do. You're going to find this, unfortunately, a lot in the Bible Belt. Some larger denominations are going to have this as well, where they're not going because they actually care about the Lord or because they want to talk to him about the last week or because they want to worship him. They're just doing it, to kind of go through the motions. And the priests end up doing that later on, where they're really interested in celebrating all of their false gods, bowing down to all their other stuff, sleeping around with whatever prostitute they want to in the temple. And then they're kind of just offering these sacrifices, if they are at all, in the morning, in the evening, just to go through the motions. And God doesn't want that either. He does. The Bible says later on, I don't desire your sacrifices anymore. I desire obedience, and I desire justice to flow like a river. And so these things can become, they can get to the point where they're just doing them because God told them to do it. It's because of what we did before, not because they're actually wanting to remember God's faithfulness. And that's what it's about. And we're going to find out actually how much it costs them to do all of this. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to read what they offer over the next 6 days. I'm just going to read them all at once. And then I'm going to count them up for you. I have it written here in my Bible, how much is actually offered, because it changes every single day. This is one of the few times where it's different every single day. So verse 17, I'm just going to run through these probably all the way to verse 38. Here's what it says. Then on the second day of the Feast of Booths, 12 bulls, two rams, 14 male lambs, 1 year old without blemish, with their grain offerings, their drink offerings for the bulls, the rams, the lambs, and by their number according to the ordinance, as 1 male goat as a sin offering, in addition to the continual burnt offering, its grain offerings, and their drink offerings. That's day 2. Day 3, on the third day of the Feast of Booths, 11 bulls, so 1 less, 2 rams, 14 male lambs, 1 year old without blemish, with their grain offerings, their drink offerings for the bulls, the rams, the lambs, and by their number according to the ordinance, and 1 male goat as a sin offering, in addition to the continual burnt offering, its grain offering, its drink offerings. First 3 days. Then on the fourth day of the Feast of Booths, 10 bulls, 2 rams, 14 male lambs, 1 year old without blemish, their grain offering, their drink offerings for the bulls, the rams, the lambs, by their number according to their ordinance, and 1 male goat as a sin offering, beside the continual burnt offerings and its grain offerings and its drink offerings. So they're doing all of their normal daily stuff, and now they're adding this on top of it. Then on the fifth day of the Feast of Booths, 9 bulls, 2 rams, 14 male lambs, 1 year old without blemish, and their grain offerings and drink offerings for the bulls, the rams, the lambs, by their number according to their ordinance, 1 male goat as a sin offering, in addition to the continual burnt offerings and grain offerings and drink offerings. And so really the priests later on that are getting all of this stuff wrong have absolutely no excuse for getting these wrong, because, in a somewhat boring detail, it is laid out line by line, number by number, exactly what they're supposed to be doing. And yet they don't know what they're doing later on in the Bible. And we're going to see that as we get into the book of Kings. Then on the 6th day of the Feast of Booths, 8 bulls, 2 rams, 14 male lambs, 1 year without blemish. Their grain offerings, their drink offerings for the bulls, the rams, the lambs, by their number according to the ordinance, and 1 male goat, again, as a sin offering, in addition to the continual burnt offering, its grain offerings, its drink offerings. Finally, the 7th day. Then on the 7th day of the Feast of Booths, 7 bulls, 2 rams, 14 male lambs, 1 year old without blemish. Their grain offering, their drink offerings for the bulls, the rams, the lambs by their number according to their ordinance, and 1 male goat as a sin offering, in addition to the continual burnt offering and its grain offering, its drink offerings. This passage is important because this shows us in great detail that there actually is precedent for taking a specific week, specific time of the year to show additional faithfulness to God, to do something extra for the Lord in addition to what we already do. I would honestly take this as, we have yearly fasts that we do in the church. Usually it starts at the beginning of the year. You want to start your year off right. This is in January. And we're following the precedent of taking a specific time each year to show additional love, additional devotion to the Lord to begin something new. So I wrote here in the Bible that there is actually precedent for taking an appointed time out of the year to offer extra devotion, sacrifices, and offerings to the Lord as a congregation. The priests are not doing this alone. This is not just Moses doing it all himself. No, the whole congregation of Israel is doing this together. They're all celebrating the Feast of Booths, and they're supposed to be celebrating it all the way until when Jesus comes along. And what's cool is I never thought about this either. I was watching The Chosen, and we actually see Jesus building one of the booths that he would have stayed in. So Jesus would have celebrated this later on as well. Okay, verse 35. And on the 8th day you shall have a solemn assembly to mark the end of the feast. You shall do no work. You shall present a burnt offering by fire, a sweet and soothing aroma to the Lord, 1 bull, 1 ram, 7 male lambs, 1 year old without blemish. Their grain offerings and drink offerings for the bull, the ram, the lambs, by their number according to the ordinance, and 1 male goat as a sin offering, in addition to the continual burnt offering, its grain offerings, and its drink offerings. So if we count it all up for these sacrifices, in 8 days, we've seen 70 bulls be sacrificed. Of the lambs, we have seen 98 be sacrificed. Of the rams, it's been 2 every day, so that's 14. My mistake. This is just the first 7 days, not the 8th day. Of the goats, we're seeing 7 goats be sacrificed over these 7 days. And of the flour, it's being measured out in ephahs. So I'm going to break this down a little bit for you. So of the flour, we see 33 3/5 of an ephah, or about 195 gallons of flour. Basically a pallet of flour. So we can just put, 1 pallet of flour. This is a lot to sacrifice in 1 week. I imagine that these priests were eating good all the time. I imagine that there was just food constantly ready for them. I honestly don't know what they would have even done with all the extra food that this is creating. Maybe they gave it to the poor. Maybe this was to be shared among the whole congregation, but they're doing it together, so I guess that would make sense. Last 2 verses for chapter 29. You shall present these to the Lord at your appointed times, in addition to the offerings you have vowed, your freewill offerings, your burnt offerings, your grain offerings, your drink offerings, and as your peace offerings. So Moses spoke to the Israelites in accordance with everything that the Lord had commanded him. So a lot to go through there. They are, this is their holiday time of the year, and the Lord is wanting to make sure that they never forget his faithfulness, never forget what he did for them, never forget that he's the one that's taking care of them. He's the one that's carried them through all of these years. Okay, now we're going to see the law of vows. This is a shorter chapter. This only has 16 verses, but let me break it down for you. There are going to be three different sections that we're talking about, three different situations, let's say. All of them have to do with a vow that a young woman is making. Again, this is probably, we make rules because a situation arises, we figure out what to do, and then we set up a rule so that we'll know what to do later on. This is probably one of those situations where vows were being made by young women, and they're still living in their father's household. This could have been they got engaged, and the parents didn't approve. This could have been they were willing to go work for some sort of something. I don't know, but suffice it to say, these women were making vows, and they were still living in their father's household. So if they have to break that vow, who is responsible? Because when we make a vow, the Lord is the one who kind of, co-signs off on it and says, okay, I see this vow. I'm going to hold you to this because you need to be speaking the truth at all times. So who bears the guilt? Here's what it says, verse 1. Then Moses spoke to the leaders of the tribes of Israel, saying, this is the thing which the Lord has commanded. If a man makes a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself with the pledge, the Amplified adds of abstinence here. So this could have been a general vow, but I think the understanding is that this is of abstinence. He shall not break or violate or profane his word. He shall do according to all that he proceeds out of his mouth. So Moses is basically just saying, hey, the Lord wants you guys to keep your word. Your yes is your yes. Your no is your no. If you say you're going to do something, then do that thing, Also, here's where it gets into the 3. If a woman makes a vow to the Lord and binds herself by pledge of abstinence while living in her father's house in her youth, and her father hears her vow and her pledge by which she has bound herself, and he offers no objection, then all her vows shall stand, and every pledge by which she has made herself shall stand. So if a woman says, Lord, I want to completely devote my life to you, I don't want even marriage to get in the way of my relationship with you, that's not something the Lord is trying to tell us to do. It's just between that woman and the Lord. If she's living in her father's house, she's still under his authority, and he overhears it and doesn't interject between her and the Lord, then her vow is a real vow, regardless of how young she is. It is a real vow, and she's to keep her word. But if her father disapproves of her making her vow on that day that he hears about it, none of her vows or her pledges by which she has bound herself shall stand. The Lord will forgive her because her father has disapproved of her making the vow. So that's the first kind. So I'm going to write these out. So if the vow is canceled immediately, or we'll just say today, then there is no guilt on either party. So we're thinking about young women here, obviously women that are still living in their father's house. He has a responsibility to make sure that she makes the right decisions for her life until she's an adult. She makes her own decisions. So if he cancels that vow on the day, he feels like it was made out of emotion, or it was made too quickly, or, we didn't have time to discuss it and really think about the ramifications of this, then he has the authority to go ahead and intervene and basically cancel her vow. The Lord doesn't hold it against anyone. Here's the second type. But if she marries while under her vows, or she has bound herself by a rash statement, the husband hears of it and says nothing about it on the day he hears it, then her vow shall stand, and her pledge by which she has bound herself shall stand. So if somehow a woman gets married and at some point in the marriage says, you know what, I want to be abstinent, I don't think that's God's plan at all. Maybe this could be a different type of vow that she makes, but she's now in her husband's house and he doesn't interject, then her vow stands. But if her husband disapproves of her making the vow on the day he hears of it, he shall annul her vow by what she is under, the rash statement of her lips by what she has bound herself. The Lord will forgive her. So basically this is going for both the father or the husband. If it's heard of that day, the husband or the father has, the ability with the Lord, the authority to go in and stand in the gap and say, no, we're not going to go down that route. That was That was a promise made too quickly. This could be having to do with abstinence, but I imagine this is a much broader rule as well. But the vow of a widow, of a divorced woman, everything by which she has bound herself shall stand. So if she doesn't live in a husband's house or a father's house, then that's her decision. Her vow has to stand. However, if she has vowed herself in her husband's house or bound herself by a pledge to an oath, her husband hears of it, but says nothing to her and does not disapprove of her making the vow, then all her vows and her pledges shall, by which she has bound herself, shall stand. So if he doesn't intervene, then her word is her word. But if her husband absolutely annuls them on the day he heard of them, then whatever proceeds from her lips concerning her vows, concerning her pledge, shall not stand. Her husband has annulled them, and the Lord will forgive her. Every vow, every binding oath to humble herself, her husband may confirm it, or her husband may annul it. But if her husband says nothing to her concerning the matter, from day to day he confirms it to all her vows and her pledges by which her pledges are on her. He has confirmed them because he said nothing to her on the day he heard it. So if he hears that she makes this promise or whatever, he lets it go, it's fine. Sorry, there's music outside. He lets it go and he moves on. Then her vow stands regardless of what it was. Then verse 15, but if he indeed nullifies them after he hears them, then he shall be responsible and bear her guilt. So if she makes a vow, he for some reason later on makes her break that vow, whatever it is, then the guilt is on him. So if the vow is canceled later, then it is the man's guilt. It's not on her. She didn't want to break the vow. It was his decision. These are the statutes which the Lord commanded Moses between a man and his wife, between a father and a daughter, while she is in her youth in her father's house. The last one is this. If she makes a vow, as a widow, a vow is canceled later, and she's a widow or she doesn't live in her husband or her father's house, she is divorced or anything like that, and she cancels it, then it is her guilt that is on her head. So really this is probably before a lot of contracts are being made. Not a lot's being put on parchment or paper at this point. So they're trying to understand who's really at fault if someone has to break a vow, someone has to break a deal that we've made. Who's going to bear the responsibility of it? Because if someone breaks a vow and the Lord holds them guilty, they're the one that have to go make atonement for it and offer up a sacrifice. And so they're trying to figure out and kind of lay down the ground rules for who is responsible. This is before, maybe it was before lawyers. I'm guessing it was before lawyers and before long contracts were drawn out and all these things were stipulated in prenuptial agreements and all these things. So the Lord is trying to help them understand, who is going to be responsible for what. So a lot of this, like we've talked about in the past, the Lord's just trying to build a society with them. He's trying to take this ragtag group of slaves that has been living under the thumb of Egypt, living under their horrible rules, and he's trying to give them a new way of life, his way of life. And so that's what he's trying to help them understand. We're going to see bits of that throughout Scripture as we walk through it. And so, okay, next week we'll be in Numbers chapter 31. Like I said, that chapter was a little shorter. We're going to see the slaughter of Midian in the next chapter. And then we're going to see where Reuben and Gilead begin to settle and, where some of these groups that they're going to be facing come from. So it's going to be a great episode next week. Tune in next week on Monday morning. Hopefully I'll get it out on Monday morning. But thank you so much for joining us for the Amplified Podcast. As always, do all the things. Leave a rating, leave a comment. If you have questions, of course, leave comments. If you're one of my youth students, please leave a comment as well. But we will see you guys soon next week. Bye-bye.